Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of our video series on early Greek art and architecture. So in this video we're going to walk through mostly the Archaic period. We may start a little bit of the Classical period as well. Let's see how far we can get with this video. So here we're looking at kind of the period even before the Archaic, kind of proto-Greece. We're starting to move away from Minoan, Mycenaean, Cycladic, and becoming a little more consistent with art forms that we start seeing around Greece and in some of its colonies. What you see on this particular vase, and we get a lot of our information about the ancient world through the pottery because it's pretty sturdy. Even when it's in pieces, we can put it back together, and we see a lot of images of everyday life put on the vases. And even if they're images of famous Greek gods and heroes, that still gives us some insight into clothing and activities and things like that. So pottery is pretty important for our understanding of the ancient world. And what we have here is an example of what we call geometric design. So what we see in these different vases are triangles, squares, spirals, things like that. Not necessarily any pictorial evidence of anything, but just geometric design. So this is fairly common. And this vase we'll look at a little more closely in a moment, but I wanted you to see how tall it is. This is called a diplon crater. A crater, well, there are lots of different kinds of craters. We'll talk about those in a later segment. But what this one would have done is, and you can see how tall it is. I included the images of the people so you can see how tall the vase is. This would have stood on a grave site, and you would have, like on an anniversary of their death or a birthday or something like that, you would come and offer libations, right? A drink, a toast to the spirit of the departed, and you would pour it into the top and it would flow through and soak into the ground beneath. So it acts kind of like a grave marker as well. So again, we see this geometric designs. This is called a meander because it meanders around, or the Greek key, we sometimes hear it called that as well. These lines, remember we've learned in another lecture, they're called registers, right? Bands of images. And up here we have a scene. It's a funeral scene. We see people carrying the deceased individual to the grave site. So again, fairly common early period. People don't really look like people yet, but we still have some of that Minoan sideways look going on, right? Where parts of the body are facing the viewer and parts are facing either left or right, kind of that combined perspective there. The heart of Greek architecture at this time, and buildings that are the best preserved, and there are lots of them, is the temple. The temple was everything. Everything kind of revolved around it. And what these show here are 4 different floor plans of temples. And you can see we have here, well, all 3 of these actually, you come up the front steps. These round marks, kind of oval marks, indicate columns. And this would be the temple inside, right, where the statue would be of the particular deity who this temple is dedicated to. So you would come up the front here, and you could go inside, you being the priest, not you as the congregation, right? We really didn't have what we consider a building that you think of now when you go to church or a synagogue or a temple of a place inside, or a mosque even. Everything took place in the open air, any kind of sacrifices or anything like that. So only the priest would go inside and make offerings to the deity, the statue of the deity within. So this one has 2 columns on the ends that are actually attached to the wall and 2 freestanding columns. This one looks pretty much the same, except for all 4 columns are freestanding. So you could come up here and stand around in front of it, but this would be the doorway in. In the amphiphoros style here, you can see there's 4 columns in the front, but they also decide to put 4 columns in the back. I guess, you know, you'll see a lot of images where this kind of temple maybe up on a hill, and behind it just sort of falls off. There's really nothing back here. But this one you would be able to walk all the way around and kind of stand on the back if you wanted to as well. You couldn't get inside, but you could stand there. So when you see these kind of floor plans, we'll be looking at these continuously as we go throughout the semester. We'll be looking at a lot of different churches. That's kind of the heart of the Middle Ages, or the different churches and cathedrals. So we'll see a lot of these floor plans again, but that's what you're looking at. If it's round or oval, that indicates a column. In Tholos meant it was a column, a temple in the round. So we'll see these kind of templates used again in the Roman world, and then borrowed as we move into the medieval world. So that's why we're spending this much time on this particular slide. And you can see this is one of those Tholos in the round kind of temples. This one, you can walk up the back steps and walk up the front, and you see the kind of a porch here, but then the temple itself, the cella we call that, C-E-L-L-A, is the part inside where the statue would be. And this one is this in Antis we saw, with the two columns at the end fixed to the wall, and then these two columns here freestanding. So these are some examples of what this looks like. So again, as they grow bigger, this one has 2 rows of columns and then a perimeter of columns all around called the peristyle. You can actually walk sheltered from the elements all the way around. The cella again is the part inside where the deity, the statue of the deity, would stand. We got kind of like a little foyer here called the pronaos, where again you'll see how these things translate to a church later on. And again, you just see kind of how arrangement of columns in different ways. All right. So we'll be spending some time looking at the, what would you call this, the plan of a temple at this time. And you should be able to recognize these elements in a photograph of a temple. So if I gave you a photograph of a real temple, you should be able to say, this is this, etc. Be able to label it all. So I will have another video just walking you through this, because we don't need all of these words. That's a lot more words than we actually need, but a number of them we will, because again, we're going to see this change over time and come right up into the medieval world as well. So we'll come back to this Doric plan and look at it in more detail in a subsequent video. We see a lot of influences from the East. So as Greece was doing, initiating trade with the Persians, for example, or people farther east, we see elements of that kind of art style making its way into the Greek vases. So we call this orientalizing. So we started off with the geometric phase, and now we're in the orientalism phase. Okay, that's just the term scholars use, orient being everything to the east, right? So we start seeing some animals come in. And then our just classic archaic sort of vases, where we start seeing mythical stories being told in these registers. It looks here like we might have the story of Oedipus, so because I'm seeing a sphinx down here. Okay, but highly decorated vases that tell stories in bands, which are called registers. Here we have a kore. A kore is a statue of a female girl, a young girl. Kore means maiden, and for a male statue would be a chorus. Very plain. We see she has generally a wig of some sort. Must have been a style at the time. Very straight, up and down, very rigid, no sense of movement, with a very kind of thin gown, kind of shows her figure off. And we start to see, don't see it too well here, but this expression on the face, this kind of smug little half smile, is called the archaic smile, and we'll see that a lot in these statues. That's kind of a classic element. You'll know you're looking at an archaic statue when you see that little smile. And here we see a figure of a chorus, a male figure, And I put it side by side with an Egyptian figure so you can kind of see the similarities. More freestanding, right? We see between the legs here all of this has been carved out, but in this Egyptian statue we see that we still have kind of support system back there and in between the arms. And in the Greek we still have the arms attached to the legs, right? But we do have some freestanding openings there. Starting to look a little more like a realistic body, right? We do have that front leg coming forward with some but you know, to show that there should be a weight differentiation. But if there really was, we would see this hip would probably be down a little farther. So if you stood up and put one leg in front of the other, you'd notice that one hip is now in a slightly different position, and they haven't done that yet. Our hips are still even. But we're starting to look a little more realistic. And you notice that the female is fully clothed and the male is not. All right, it takes a while before they start disrobing the female. Here we're starting to see a little bit better this idea of real anatomy. Now that that foot is forward, we're starting to see a little bit of a weight shift here. It's not exactly across, it kind of more goes at an angle. But these two figures are only about 50, 70 years apart. So we're starting to see a big change during this period. Everything's looking a little more realistic, and again, that little smirky grin there. We call it archaic smile. I don't know that it was ever meant as a smile. There's a lot of different theories, but these originally would have been painted. Okay, they wouldn't have been white like they are now, but every now and again they get a statue that has some color in it somewhere, so you can tell it used to be painted. This figure, the idea of it's called the calf bearer. We'll see this figure come up again when we look at a little bit about Christian art. We're not going to do a lot with that, but as we go into the Middle Ages, we'll see this figure of the shepherd and what it comes to symbolize as we go. I just wanted to include it to show how old this idea of the shepherd is. We also get a lot of carvings on the temples. I'm going to go back just a couple slides here. This section, this entablature is called, this whole section here is called the entablature, and it's the part of the temple that gets the most kind of carving. So here's the architrave, and this is the frieze. So architrave and frieze. In the frieze, in the Doric column, we often have these sections that have these ridges on it, then a flat panel, then a section with ridges and a flat panel, then a section with ridges. It would go along with like that. In these flat panels, they're called the metopes. That's this word right here, metope. The ridges are called the triglyph, and these flat panels are called the metope. This is where we'd often have a lot of carvings. So that's what we're seeing here, is a carving in that metope region, and they'd have to be kind of large so you could see them from the ground. But that's just another art form, is these sculptural reliefs. Not a freestanding sculpture, but a relief, we call that. When the carving is part of a structure, it's called a relief. Okay, and this is a shallow relief. You can see this is a very deep relief. This is a very shallow one. And here we have the fully realized, what we call contrapposto, and that word is in your textbook. I'll have a list of those words for you and the pages that they're on. But this is the idea of that foot going forward, the weight on the hips being shifted. But still pretty static. These sculptures aren't doing anything. You kind of see the holes in his eyes here. He would have had kind of jeweled, like maybe shell-like sort of thing, or onyx or something in there that would make it look more like eyeballs, but those obviously have been lost along the way. But they're still pretty static. They're just standing there. They've got that foot moved forward, but really nothing's happening. You won't see those changes coming until later. And vase painting. Books have been written on the different styles of vase painting. We won't go into that, but different styles, red on black, black on red, and white figures, all sorts of different styles of vase painting. A crater, and this is an example of a crater, has the handles on the side. It would be a mixing bowl for wine. The Greek wine was extremely strong, so you just didn't drink it straight from the jar. You would pull it in this crater and mix it with water before it was served to the guests. So that's what a crater is. You'll see those a lot. Okay? And that is our quick review of archaic Greek art and architecture.